Hi, I'm Felina. Welcome to Felina's Pages. Today we're talking about Sally Rooney and reviewing her 3 most popular books. So hopefully this can provide some insight and you can decide whether you want to join in or whether you want to be like, yo, leftist propaganda and avoid it. Which I think is kind of a shame because there's a lot that Sally Rooney's books have to offer. Why do I say people think it's left-wing propaganda? Well, because it's about a bunch of college students, it's set in Ireland, and among things like relationships and love, they do complain about capitalism like a lot, and personally I find that pretty funny because I think our generation, here I'm lumping in Gen Z and millennials, which will get me hate from both sides, our generations are much more critical about the system than the generations before us, and also I do think it has a lot to do with social circles. Sally Rooney is Irish and the characters who she writes are all mainly around her age, so around 30, as we'll see that's significant. People complain about the politics in this book like a lot, and I don't think it's necessarily only this book, I think it's politics in general. People love to complain, but in terms of Sally Rooney, the books do spike a lot of controversy because people are like, well, why are all your characters talking at a party about, like, the Gaza Strip, and why do they have to mention inequality like every 50 pages? A legitimate concern that I've heard mentioned is like, why are all the characters so left, which left me speechless. Not to be that person who pulls out statistics and pulls a Marianne at a party and starts talking politics and whatever, but like in 2020 the Irish election saw an embrace of left-wing politics, and it was mostly young people carrying it. 18 to 34 was the demographic that basically carried the left-wing party. 18 to 34, again, young people, again, Ireland. Like, I think it makes sense why all the characters are so socially left, right? I don't know why I did that in quotations, but like, yeah. I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that the conservative, religious Republican is probably not invited because they're hanging out with solely their friends. But although politics play a certain role, I don't think you should automatically dismiss the books as just like left-wing thinkers only, because I think what makes them so popular is the writing and the atmosphere that they create. It's written really simply and the point is put forward in basic terms. It's not adorned with like metaphors and other stuff like that. It's very to the point, but at the same time it explores like difficult topics, like for example normal people class disparities. So I think the book gives people a lot of intellectual pleasure because you can actively engage with the difficult topics here without exerting yourself. So whereas before people would go to classics and then of course they would like actively engage with the classics, but they would have to exert themselves trying to understand the antiquated language. Here we have books that explore serious topics in a simple way, and I think it really is writing for the new generation. The Technical University of Denmark in 2019, they released a study finding trends that people's attention spans are narrowing because there's just so much information out there. And there have been other studies since then saying things like, oh, it's not true, people's attention spans aren't decreasing, it's not that bad. But I think regardless, these days people are extremely busy and people want to save time. Time is quite literally money. So in an effort to save time, I do think that people focus and engage with things much less. Like, why would you watch a 20-minute video where you can watch a 2-minute TikTok that explains something? But the issue with that is that the information is very processed and you're basically relying on excerpts that other people give you. So I do think in that regard, people do have less tolerance for waiting and actually like actively doing stuff themselves. And so because Sally Rooney does allow you to process all of this and decide for yourself what you think of the characters, and because it's written so easily, it doesn't have that many adornments, and also all her books are pretty short, I think this is just one of the reasons that she's becoming so popular, and she's literally becoming a cult symbol. Who are you if you're not a Sally Rooney reader? And she's been referred to as the writer of the millennials, not only because of the simplicity in writing, but because the characters in her books, they all have that quality that I guess we associate with millennials and our generation, that being Gen Z. This whole like, yes, we know we're going to have a difficult life, but also we're just dealing with it like as best as we can. Just leave us alone. It's like, beautiful world, where are you? And one thing that I feel is important to say right now is that her work isn't really relatable to all, although it is being channeled as this ultimate relatability factor. It's it's because it's set in these environments with, like, for example, Trinity is a prestigious college, right? Well, it's basically a bunch of like rich Irish people, or at least upper middle class, getting their education, who are quite involved politically. So we have the whole dynamic in normal people, where Connell, for example, is feeling out of place in the university. In terms of diversity, the books are all pretty similar. There's not really like Asian characters or black characters. It's not representative. But I think that the reason this is like that is because, well, in these prestigious settings, it's still like that. And also we have the whole idea that, for example, Marianne and Connell, they're from the same small town. Like, they know each other and it's a small town, so they don't exactly have many friends who are different from them in terms of background, because they kind of tend to stick with the people who they grow up with, right? And honestly, I'd rather it's like this than having some token minority representation who literally isn't developed at all. So male characters, they're kind, and they tend to be described as like these people who help everyone, who donate to charity, who care about ending the inequality, right? And what they love to do is they love to hurt the female characters, and the female characters love to tell themselves that they're not worthy. No one has an easy time admitting that they like each other. The characters do so many things that are incredibly self-destructive. It's that kind of behavior, and it's honestly just so messy, but at the same time incredibly intimate. It feels like the reader is intruding on a scene that they shouldn't be intruding, but at the same time, you really can't take yourself away from this. One other quality of Sally Rooney's writing that you should know about is that there are no speech marks at all, and this makes sure that the flow is pretty much uninterrupted and you're really absorbed in the story. And it's really hard to break away from it because of this, and plus the whole emotional depth. I think if you're an older person, maybe this will remind you of your youth and resonate in that way, or certain aspects like making poor decisions. Or if you're a young person, maybe this reminds you of your time currently in university. I understand why people call it relatable, not the part where you have affairs with married men and then go to Sweden and have random strangers take photos of you, not that part, but just the emotional depth of it, all the way that you view life as a young person. So for example, like those little slights that people dig at you, they grow into something super important. You really pay attention to them, even though you know that you probably shouldn't. This whole like not understanding where you're going with life, not being sure what you want to do in life, but seemingly you have so much time, and then you get to a stage in your life and you realize that, like, where is all the time, right? It's very realistic. I love the idea that we finally have books where it's this disillusionment of the idea that life is going to be perfect and everything is going to work out great. It's just very real. The characters have moments where they're incredibly happy, right? They're moving on, they're enjoying life, all of that kind of thing. And then they have moments where they have a mental breakdown, but it's also not like sensationalized. It's just a normal process. You do this, you move on with your life. Perhaps that's why we find it so absorbing, the heartfelt truth and the fact that for once no one is propagating a message. So it's not like life is perfect, but it's also not like God is dead and we have killed him. Pause to read. This is something that Sally Rooney said in an interview with British Council, and I think she's definitely part of these writers because her female characters are just something else. I'm so glad we're finally starting to have characters like this, because her female characters are so powerful. The male characters refer to them as in constant control. They know what they're doing, yet at the same time they're insecure. And I feel like it's a very realistic dynamic, and for once I feel like we actually have realistic women in literature, because it's usually like either it's this superficial fake empowering woman who's basically a girl boss and all she does is slay, but she doesn't have like any emotions whatsoever, or it's like the super insecure girl who relies on men to do pretty much everything. I think the way that Sally Rooney writes her female characters is great. If you follow me on Instagram, which you should, by the way, wink wink, then you know that I already did a review on this before, but I figured that instead of linking the review, I would just like summarize my thoughts real quick. Conversations with Friends is about two college students who are best friends. One is called Frances, who is actually the narrator, and she has a lot of observations on life. She has very interesting thoughts, and her best friend is Bobby, who is very involved and who has an opinion on everything. And so the two are performing in a spoken poetry event. They are up there on stage when after it, a journalist comes up to them. Her name is Melissa, and she introduces herself to them. And basically what happens after is that she drags them into her very rich, expensive, sophisticated life, and she actually has a husband. So the two college students and the married couple, they become very, very involved. Conversations with Friends is written in first person. It's very stream of consciousness, and I think that if you're a person for who morals matter like a lot, then you might have a hard time reading this book because there are a series of extremely messy decisions being made. And also Frances has her quirks, which if you don't really like unlikable characters, this might prove to be difficult to you as well. Personally, I think that you should start with normal people. I love the focus on Frances' mental health and the fact that it isn't romanticized. She is very self-absorbed though, so fair warning. In general, Sally Rooney is great about not finishing endings with happy endings just for the sake of it. I love the ending and the second half way more than the first half because of specifically the mental health explorations and the focus on exactly why Frances does what she does. And as usual, this is a great book club pick. All of Sally Rooney's books are great book club picks because there's just so much to discuss. For example, here we talk about the need for stability that people have, and also how the characters in this book, they just can't express their thoughts to each other. There are characters who are extremely confident, but they still prefer not to say. Or there are characters who are extremely insecure, but they just go around and do whatever they want to do, basically. So that's just a very interesting dynamic to navigate. And of course, the whole interfering with the married couple, like what's it like in a marriage where there isn't so much love anymore, and just the dynamic between Frances, who's having the affair, and Melissa, who like invited them into their homes. So yeah, but it's very interesting. I do think that it is very similar to normal people, perhaps too similar. In normal people, we follow much the same tropes. We have the university students, we have the Dublin, but whereas in Conversations with Friends, it was like society's disapproval that was the root of all evil, because Frances constantly felt bad about the affair, but she loved the guy and all of that kind of thing. Here, the problem is Connell, and specifically because he feels insecure about his status position, about his class position with Marianne, because Marianne is like quite wealthy, and Connell's mother works as a cleaner for Marianne's mother, so it's like Connell feels that he's not really worthy of Marianne, and he feels really uncomfortable with their relationship. But Marianne is actually like the opposite. She doesn't really care. She only cares about Connell's opinion, and so it really hurts her that he behaves this way, that he's like ashamed to be seen with her. It's really unfair that people don't like Marianne because she doesn't really care about what people think of her. She only cares about Connell because he's the one person that matters to her. And I don't know, like, yes, she has her things, this whole, like, I guess she comes off as pretentious. She talks about politics at a party. At that one party, she talks about it for hours and people get annoyed. Like, yes, I understand, but she's, like Connell says, she's very genuine. And honestly, I really felt for Marianne because I felt like I just wanted to slap Connell the entire time, you know? There was a particularly engaging and very representative scene that I really enjoyed. It was the scene where Connell asks Marianne, have you read I can't speak today. Where Connell asks Marianne, have you read the Communist Manifesto? And Marianne is like, yes. But to her, it's an intellectual work. To her, it's very abstract. It's very like, let's talk about it in a room full of other privileged people and let's like confront inequality. Marx is like this abstract idea that any respected scholar academic is exploring, but for Connell it's reality. And so it's like this difference in how they view one work that's really interesting. And in normal people, there's a lot of such moments where this class disparity is shown, but again, it is really about just separate people and the insecurities that they have. Normal People is better written than Conversations with Friends because it has many more such like absorbing and memorable moments than Conversations with Friends because it explores this disparity in such an interesting way. But I did find Conversations with Friends more engaging. Maybe it's because I read it first, so I couldn't really appreciate it because it was just like so similar. It felt like Sally Rooney was just kind of like, let's do the same thing but different, you know? And I also don't think this book is like particularly something revolutionary, unlike Beautiful World, Where Are You? And finally, we get on to Beautiful World, Where Are You? My little favorite. Beautiful World, Where Are You? I read it on my Kindle and I just wanted to hold a hardback copy after that. I want to own it. I want to reread it. And if you know me, that you know that that's meaningful praise because I rarely reread things. Beautiful World, Where Are You? Made me find the beautiful world. It made me want the bucket hats. Basically, there's Alice and Elaine, and Alice is this really popular novelist who gave me a crisis trying to figure out where the boundaries between Sally Rooney and Alice lie, like how much of Sally Rooney is in Alice. And Alice is very famous and she's incredibly wealthy, but she doesn't really want her wealth. And Elaine works as an editor at a literary magazine and she doesn't really make that much money. And so the two, there's like feelings of jealousy that are slowly explored throughout the book that are very interesting, and the two literally avoid seeing each other for like the entirety of the book. And what they do is they exchange these long-winded emails that are genuinely pieces of art. Imagine not writing you as you to your friend. Imagine writing something like this. Each day, even each hour of each day, replaces and makes irrelevant the time before, and the events of our lives make sense only in relation to a perpetually updating timeline of news content. So those emails felt weird and they felt a little bit out of place, if you know what I mean, because I can't imagine ever writing like this to my friend who I supposedly love, who has been there through hard times, and I'm just writing this kind of thing. But I also feel like it just really added to the book, and I actually really enjoyed reading those emails because they were written beautifully. And you could just feel the closeness between Alice and between Elaine. And I think it started off like they just randomly wrote like this to each other as a joke, and then it became meaningful to them, so they just kept writing it. I will say that I think Sally Rooney was a little bit lazy here because she could have used the ideas that were explored in the emails, like what is aestheticism, like how can you worship those who believe in God but you yourself do not believe in God. They were very interesting themes, right? But she didn't explore them in a separate book. In terms of character development, both Alice and Elaine miles by the end of the book. Like, although it feels technically that they did not change, there's just what feels like a fundamental shift in both of their behavior, and I really enjoyed it. Beautiful World, Where Are You? It just seemed like Sally Rooney grew so much as a writer, and it feels very different from normal people and conversations with friends. Like, yes, it has that distinct quality, but it's just a really special book, also in terms of where the characters are at the end. Also, the sneaky references to the pandemic at the end, it feels incredibly relevant. And also, it's actually not set in Ireland. It starts off in Australia and they travel all around the world together. Alice meets a stranger on Tinder and they really hit it off. The stranger's name is Felix, and you know what she does? She takes him to Rome. Did I mention that Alex, that's like their ship name. Alice, did I mention that she's like rich? She's like rich. And the way that these like small things are talked about, like how certain people aren't happy but they still love and support her, it's just, and also the usual like exploration of mental health and depression, it's just so normal. It's treated as being so normal. It's not like drawn attention to over the top. I think it's great, honestly. And I know I'm being an absolute incoherent ramble about what exactly happens. One thing I will say is that the pacing could have been improved at the beginning. I wasn't that absorbed in the story, but it evened out, and there's also more descriptions of things, so that's great as well. It really made me happy to see Sally Rooney throw out some similes for once, you know. And also, I feel like the third person style really works fantastically for Sally Rooney's work, especially in this book. The male characters could have used a little bit more development, but it was just so interesting to see how all the characters viewed each other through different lenses, and because it was in third person, it really enabled us to see that. If you choose to read only one Sally Rooney book, read Beautiful World, Where Are You? I hope that my video was interesting to you, that you decided to pick up something by Sally Rooney. Please share your thoughts with me about Beautiful World, Where Are You? I'm really interested to know what you think. See you next week. Thank you. Bye!